Hey guys, welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. As a reminder, if you guys come back and enjoy watching these videos, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button. Really lets me know to keep on with this channel and doing these videos for you guys. In this video, we're going to take 8 used firearms that have come into our store either through the front door or the website and give you guys about a 4 or 5 minute review of each to let you guys see some different stuff that is out there on the market. Remember, the point of this video is strictly for entertainment and education. We're not making this video to sell or market anything, just to keep it in accordance with YouTube's policies. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it now. Alright, this video is brought to you by our website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you are considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please log on to our site, create an account, and from there you can submit your firearms for an offer request. Now with that offer, you will get a printable offer certificate, which you can take with you to competing gun stores in your area to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get a better deal, go ahead and sell them to us. We do provide you with a shipping label, and we will pay you with either a paper check or ACH direct deposit to make the process as easy for you as possible. So please go check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. Now remember, the format of this video is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses, starting us off with our first firearm. Now this one comes to us from a viewer in Florida, so thank you so much for sending this one to us. This is a Walther PPK, specifically it is a PPK-S. I'll talk a little bit about what that means as we go through this video. Now this is a so-called first edition stainless, double single action. It's got a fixed barrel, straight blowback. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about specifically this exact model as we get into it, but first let's back up and take a look at the development of this pistol. In 1929, Walther released a revolutionary new concealed carry pistol design known as the Walther PP police pistol, chambered in .32 automatic. Now it would hit the commercial market in Germany by storm. It was the first of the new modern line of small concealed carry pistols. You did have the Sauer .32 automatic and the Walther No. 4, Model 4, which were both popular in World War I, but it was clear that the PP was going to pave the way for the new age of small concealed carry firearms. Now the PP did excellent on the German commercial market as well as the police market, but they wanted something even a little bit smaller. So a couple years later, Walther would release a new pistol with a shorter barrel and a shorter grip, known as the PPK, Police Pistol Criminal. Now, K does not stand for Kurtz, as a lot of people often assume. Kurtz meaning short, which would make sense. PPK, it is the Police Pistol Criminal. Now, through the 1930s, the sales of both the PP and PPK were phenomenal. It was a very well respected, very well liked, very heavily used pistol for both police and commercial use. Now in the 1940s, starting 1939, Germany's getting into World War II, PP and PPKs would be folded into German military service, typically found with officers as a sidearm or deep concealment backup pistol. Now, after World War II, of course, we all know Germany would lose the war and the Allies would order Germany to cease all military arms production, so Walther had to cease on the production of the PP line. Now, they were licensed in the late 1940s with Manurin in France to produce the PP pistol, and later Walther would resume production again in Ulm in Germany, the so-called West German marked PPKs. Now, through the late 1950s into the 1960s, these would be imported into the United States for the commercial market, and they saw wide success there as well. Actually, worldwide, the PPK and the PP pistols were very well respected, even being copied by a lot of other countries like Russia with the Makarov design on the fixed barrel straight blowback principles that were popular, or at least known, on the PP and the PPK. Now in 1968 in the United States, we passed what is known as the GCA, the Gun Control Act of 1968. That imposed a point system on all imported firearms where the pistol had to exceed a certain number of points to be importable. Points were added due to weight, size, caliber, and things like that. Now when the PPK was looked at, it actually fell short of the point requirement by 1 point. So the PPK was no longer importable into the United States. They had to redesign, and they did, and they came out with the PPK-S. Now what the PPK-S is, and that's actually what this is you have a PPK slide-in frame, or slide-in barrel, excuse me, and a PP frame, giving it the extra length on the grip, which gives you an additional round in the magazine, and enough added weight to get it over that last point, making it importable again, however, as the PPK-S. Through the late 1960s to the mid-1970s, they would be imported here by Inner Arms, and again seeing wide success in use. Now by the late 1970s, the US commercial market was seeing a lot of competition in the small frame pistol game. Concealed carry was becoming very popular. A lot of nice, lightweight, ergonomic, and cheap alternatives were coming out on the market, and with importation these were becoming too expensive and therefore falling out of favor when people were looking at their next concealed carry pistol to purchase. So Walther had to cut costs. They looked at the best way to do that. It would be to reduce importation and come up with US-based manufacturing. So Inner Arms actually would partner with a company called Ranger, I believe in Alabama, to manufacture these commercial, or locally, excuse me, which they would do between 1978 and 1999. So manufactured by Ranger, not at all marked Ranger anywhere on the firearm, distributed by Inner Arms, under license by Walther. Now those were actually very popular and saw a lot of sales. They could sell the original Model PPK again because it's being made domestically. Now in 1999, Ranger would cease production and the contract or the license would then be granted to Smith & Wesson in 2002, who would manufacture them until 2013. Now the Smith & Wesson PPKs did see a recall in 2009, thus solidifying the Smith & Wesson PPK, the impression on the market of them not being a very good manufactured representation. They were known for having issues, therefore to collectors and stuff, people typically avoid these Smith & Wesson PPKs. Now in 2013, Walther themselves wanted to come into the US consumer market and build their own manufacturing here domestically, which they broke ground on in 2013. In 2018, they were open and began producing firearms, one of which they were going to release is the new PPK or PPKS pistols, and by 2019 they had started entering the market. Now as a grand sort of release, they would co-op with Tallow to produce 1,250 so-called first edition PPK pistols and release these first, sort of as a, hey, they're welcome back, you know, sort of cutting of the ribbon, if you will, of them being produced again here domestically by Walther, not imported, not made or licensed by anybody else. They would come out with a price of about $800 to $900, and of course they are no different than the other domestic Walther PPK production other than these Coca-Cola wood grips and the first edition engraving on the side of the slide. Very, very cool pistols. I have not seen any used ones on the market. I assume this is not going to be too far off of what the price of just a standard used Walther produced PPK or PPKS would go for. But anyway, very, very cool pistol. Happy to share it with you guys. Let's move on to the next one. All right, up next is a very popular rifle, this one coming to us from a local customer. This is a Finnish M39, and as you can see, it has very close ties to the Russian M91 Mosin Nagant or M9130. This is a bolt-action rifle feeding from an internal box magazine chambered in 7.62x54R. Now, although there are a lot of similarities to the Mosin Nagant rifle or the M91 rifle from Russia, there are some obvious differences as well. So this did go through an evolutionary change, separating from the traditional pattern known as the Russian design. And there's some reasons for that. Actually, some political reasons that follow along the changes of the rifle itself. Now, if we go back to 1917, following the Russian Revolution, Finland would actually gain its independence. Now, because there was a lot of communist influence in Finland at the time, the then new Finnish government wanted to eradicate any remaining Russian influence from the country. So there was a civil guard at the time known as the Finnish Whites. This was a Finnish militia that was derived from volunteers. It was somewhat of a volunteer army. So the Finnish government instructed the Finnish Whites to go remove any remaining Russian presence, Russian garrisons from Finland. Now at the time there was an organization known as the Finnish Socialist Workers' Republic, also known to many people in the West as the Socialist Red Guard, red because of their ties to communism and having been backed by Lenin himself in Russia. And they decided to create an oppositional force, therefore declaring a civil war on the Finnish Whites. So you have the War of the Whites and the Reds of 1918. Now this war would only last 1 year and the Finnish Whites would win, thus further solidifying Finland as an independent country, removing any ties of communism in the region. Now, this would turn into basically you had the general Finnish army, and you also have the Finnish Guard being built out of the Finnish Whites, or the White Guard, however you want to call it, but we'll call it the Civil Guard. Now, because there were a ton of Russian M91s left in military depots and there was a ton of 7.62x54R, Finland decided to standardize on the rifle, the M91, with the ammunition, the 7.62x54R. Now, they did incorporate Seiko to go through a sort of rearmament process. A lot of these would be rebarreled. They would source Swiss-made barrels. Seiko, VKT, and Tikka would actually take up production of actually later into the M39. But at this time, VKT and Seiko would start re-arsenaling these rifles and producing them at home in Finland as well. Now, because there were two separate military groups, the Army and the Civil Guard, they would actually go their own direction, of course, starting on the general platform of the M91, but they would start to get their own revisions and sort of go their separate ways in their final production rifles. Now, the Army would land on what was known as the M27, and the Civil Guard would land on what was known as the M28. The Army focusing on a shorter, heavier profile barrel, better front sights with the protected ears up here at the front, which you see incorporated on this M39, and the Civil Guard focusing on things like the rear sight and the trigger, taking some advantages that had been explored in the M27 rifle, like the shorter, heavier profile barrel as well. Earlier iterations of both rifles were longer, like the M91, but as the years would go on, they would end up with a shorter, compact package like this. But still, there were changes in, like, the barrel bands were different, some of the bolt components were different, the trigger components were different, the sight components were different, so they were not completely interchangeable rifles. Now, in 1939, the Finnish government thought, okay, we need to put an end to this, different usages of what is really ostensibly the same rifle. Let's go ahead and come up with a standardized design that we can issue countrywide, and they would land on this, the M39, which was the compromise essentially between the M27 and the M28, incorporating the best features of both platforms, and then you have this. Now, this would come about too late to be used in the Finnish Winter War, but it was the standard issue rifle used in the Second Soviet-Finnish War, also known as the Continuation War of 1941 to 1944. Now, Finland had aimed to gain back territory it had lost to Russia in the Winter War, which is its reasons for really invading Russia at the time. They were also co-oping with Nazi Germany, who was at war with Russia as well, so taking that as an opportunity. But this would have been known really as the Second World War era rifle of Finland. So, beautiful rifle, again, having been made by VKT, Seiko, and Tikka. This one is a VKT. They were made in some slight different configurations based on the stocks, like a two-piece stock or a solid stock here in the back. The two-piece stock like this was made on a shorter stock blank. They did have the sort of the hex type receivers for extra rigidity. Very nice tangent rear sight, which is something that the Army wanted on the sight that was incorporated on the M39 with the protective ears up here at the front. So very cool rifles on the market today. You tend to find these are racing in value. You tend to find them, in the $600 to $800 mark or so, depending on condition, matching, and things like that. Really pristine mint conditions I've seen get upwards of about $1,000, but typically $600 to $800 is about where you find them. So very cool rifle. Happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next we have a beautiful revolver that comes to us from a local customer. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 24. Now, specifically, this is a 24-3 Lou Horton, and I'll explain a little bit about what that is here in a minute. Now, this is not the original box. It would have originally come in a cardboard box. Now, this is a 6-round capacity swing-out cylinder 44 special revolver, double single action. Smith & Wesson offered these in 4 and 6 inches. This is a 3-inch, and again, I'll explain that here in a minute. They did offer a stainless version known as a 624. Now, in 1950, they would introduce this as the 4th variation of the hand eject models that actually debuted in the early 1900s. Now, when they debuted the hand eject model, they wanted to have it come out with a new and improved impressive cartridge to pair with the revolver. Now, prior to its release in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s, the 44 and the 45 caliber round were dominant in the revolver world. So they wanted to take a 44 caliber cartridge and revamp it with the new smokeless powder. Now, they would start with the 44 Russian. The 44 Russian was chambered in the then old Smith & Wesson No. 3 large frame revolvers, of which Russia had a contract, therefore were made in 44 Russian. It was a fantastic cartridge that people loved at the time, but it was in the black powder. So in the early 1900s, they took the 44 Russian, elongated it, put smokeless powder in it, and by 1907, they had the 44 Special. Now, it itself also was a very popular cartridge. Elmer Keith, who was a famous wildcatter, did a bunch of hand load experimenting, writing about the round, and it gained a lot of popularity. By 1950, Smith & Wesson again came out with the 4th model of the hand eject revolver, the Model 1950, which was this. It was a dedicated 44 Special, beautiful large frame revolver, and people absolutely loved it. However, the problem is in 1955, just a few short years later, Smith & Wesson would release the 44 Magnum in the Model 29 revolver. Now, Elmer Keith also would highly tout the 44 Magnum. He was instrumental in its development, and because the Model 29 could also fire the 44 Special, the Model 24 would quickly fall out of favor amongst consumer buyers. Now, in 1957, Smith & Wesson would actually drop the year model designation in exchange for a numerical model designation, so this would be renamed the Model 24. By about 1966, sales of these were so bad they would actually fall out of production and these would be discontinued. Now, through the 70s, a bunch of gun writers would actually start taking the 44 Special again, hand-loading it, and highly touting the use and the application and the lower recoil and the high velocity and muzzle energy of the 44 Special, and therefore through the 1970s, the 44 Special started gaining a lot of popularity. All of a sudden, everybody's looking for old Model 24s on the used market. The prices of them are exploding, and people are even taking things like Colt revolvers or Smith & Wesson revolvers and trying to get them rechambered into a 44 Special round. Now, you might ask, why not just take the Model 29, which was commercially available, and just shoot 44 Special in it? Well, you could, but remember the revolver itself is very large, very heavy, with a larger chamber and a bull barrel. Therefore, because it's scaled up for the larger 44 Magnum round, therefore you have a lot of unnecessary heft weight and kind of balance issues when part of the advantages of the 44 Special is a smaller, lighter weight firearm. So listening to the market in 1983, Smith & Wesson would reintroduce the Model 24. Now, they did a very, very short run of 4 and 6 inch barrels, and they discontinued them again in the late 1980s, I think around 1986, 1987. Now, at that time, Lou Horton, which was a distributor, wanted to take part in this, and they wanted a special round-butted version with a 3-inch barrel, and they would only make about 5,000 of them. They wanted to co-op with Smith & Wesson to do this very specialty short run, and that's what this is, the Lou Horton Model 24-3. So this is one of 5,000 made with a round butt and a 3-inch barrel. So pretty interesting on that. Now, Smith & Wesson did recently introduce the 24 again as part of the Classic series. I don't know if it's still in production or going to remain in production, but this is really the last of sort of the hoorah of the Model 24. These specifically were only manufactured between 1984 and 1985. The re-released the Lou Horton with the 3-inch. So on the used market, these go anywhere from about $1,200 to $1,500 or so, as long as they're in good condition. This one's excellent. A couple little handling marks in the wood, but the bluing's gorgeous. Of course, non-original box. So very cool revolver. Happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next we have a very popular rifle. This one coming to us from a viewer in Arizona. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Israeli Galil. Specifically, this is an ATI Galeo, and I'll talk specifically about what that is here in a minute. First, let's take a look at the history. If we go back to the end of the Second World War, by the end of World War II, most countries are noticing that the side that is able to produce a higher volume of fire in any type of battle engagement is more likely to win. That's why the United States is issuing things like the M1 Garand, Russia with the SBT-40, Germany with the G41 and G43, and the advantages of these self-loading rifles is very evident. Now, moving through the late 1940s into the early 1950s, militaries around the world are scrambling to revamp their armaments into this new self-loading technology. Some of them are going the route of the battle rifle, which is a full-powered rifle cartridge and a self-loading package with a detachable magazine. Some of them are going the route of the assault rifle with an intermediate cartridge, like the SKS or the AKM AK-47 pattern of rifle. Now, the IDF in Israel, or the Israeli Defense Forces, Israel was actually using a lot of leftover surplus German war equipment from the Second World War. This is things like Mausers and MG42s, rechambered for the 7.62 NATO round. They were fine, but with bolt action type of technology, they're clearly going to be left behind. So they look for a new weapon to implement into their military, and they look to one of the best-selling battle rifles on the market at the time, which is the FN-FAL. They would adopt this in the 1950s, and it would actually serve pretty well. However, by about 1967 in the Six-Day War, Israel was starting to notice the limitations of the rifles. You have other more prominent designs coming out on the market. Like in the 1960s, the United States is developing the M16. By the 1960s, the AKM, AK-47 pattern of rifle with a modernized version on the stamped receiver is starting to become prevalent on most battlefields around the world. which is exactly what they saw in the Six-Day War. They're seeing the Mahdi-produced Egyptian AKs, which they're picking up off the battlefield, noticing that they are so much lighter than the FAL. The 7.62x39 is more viable at typical engagement ranges, which is an intermediate range. They're very easy to train on. They're very easy to produce. They're very reliable. They don't ever jam or go out of service or out of action, like which was actually typical of the FAL in the sandy conditions. So the IDF is saying, look, this is a much better, much improved design. We need to move into something other than the FAL. Let's take something that's got the rigidity and the reliability and the ease of manufacture of the AKM with the accuracy of what we're seeing in the United States with the M16 and the 5.56. So in the late 1960s, Israel, the IDF, would put out a solicitation for a new service rifle. Now, there would be many submissions, the M16 and the Stoner 63 in the United States, the HK33 from Germany, and then Yisrael Galil himself would actually introduce this pattern, originally built on the Valmet or Valmet RK62, which was an AK pattern with the 5.56 cartridge. So it had a very finely made, and actually the early Galils were built on RK62 receivers. So very finely made receivers, AK pattern with the 5.56 cartridge, which was a total winner and would be adopted by Israel. Now, by 1972, it was officially adopted, however, was not ready to go into service, and then in 1973, Israel was pulled into the Yom Kippur War. Now, during this war, they are still using the FAL rifles. They are further noticing the limitations. IDF are getting very frustrated. They're throwing them down, picking up even things like Uzis, which are 9mm submachine guns, but they're lighter, shorter, and more reliable than the FALs at that point. So when the Yom Kippur War was over, the IDF went full scale and getting the Galil into service, which they did. Now, it would serve with the IDF all the way up until the 90s, although more M16s, funny enough, were actually used in IDF service. Now, by about 1999, the M16 was actually officially replacing the Galil, and then in the early 2000s, they would be further replaced by the Tavor series of rifle. Now, what we have here specifically is a company, ATI, American Tactical Industries, I believe is I, has taken actual original Israeli Galil parts kits and built them on new US-made receivers and barrels. Now, they would release these in 2019 with a price of about $1,500 and sell them to the commercial market. Since they have been very hard to get, I don't know if the parts kits have dried up, probably just like a lot of other firearms, they become a little bit tough to get. So they're not too prevalent. I know Atlantic has been selling them and things like that with a typical price of about $1,500. So from what I've heard, they're very well manufactured and they function just fine. Again, built right off the Israeli parts kits. You have all the functions like the bipod, the wire cutter, bottle opener, bipod, side folding stock. So other than the new, US made barrel and receiver, it is, an actual Israeli Galil. So very, very cool rifle, and happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next is a very impressive firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Arkansas. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Colt M45A1. For those of you who watch the unboxing videos, you've already taken a quick peek at this. The M45A1 is clearly a 1911 pattern. It does have a lot of modern features on it and is in the FDE or the tan sort of coloration, which is indicative of what we're seeing on a lot of modern military sidearms today. Now, clearly looking at it, it is a, as mentioned, modernized 1911. The 1911 has had a very long track record with the United States military, first entering service and production about 1912. It is a John Moses Browning design. It served very well in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And of course, some smaller isolated conflicts in between those events. And it would be officially replaced by the Beretta M9 in about 1985. Now, there were certain elements of the United States military that were resistant to the new M9 pistol, specifically the Marine Corps with MUSOC, the Marine Expeditionary Unit Special Operations Capable, and Force Recon. They wanted to go ahead and keep with the tradition of the 1911. Of course, it had served the Marine Corps very well, known for accuracy, known for reliability, and of course the larger man-stopping 45 ACP. So in 1986, they would actually adopt the M45 pistol as their standard issue sidearm. Now, effectively, what that was an original 1911 A1. Of course, the A1s got modified in time for service in World War II, but they would take modified 1911 A1s that Marine Corps armorers would kind of go back through the firearms, replace all worn out, broken parts, and put in nice triggers, barrels, just a bunch of high upgrades on the pistols. Now, because each one of these pistols was getting very special attention, the amount that could be produced was not very high. So even though these were, we're not equipping the General Army or the General Marine Corps or the Navy or the Air Force with these new pistols, it was okay for the limited production that was being done, but they were highly accurized, very reliable and accurate firearms. Now, when we get into the early 2000s, of course, we have the war in Iraq, and there is starting to become a greater need for a greater supply of 1911s, and what was being done with sort of the supply of sort of reconfiguring and armoring existing 1911s was too slow. So the Marine Corps, specifically these Special Forces elements, were looking at a quicker alternative. Again, they wanted to stay with the 1911, but they needed to increase production. So through the 2000s, they would use a series of stopgaps in bringing in companies like Kimber to fill contracts and roles with the 1911 pistols, but ultimately they would work with Colt, who would come out with this design in 2012, being dubbed the M45A1. Now, effectively, what this was a Colt CCU railgun that had been repurposed for the needs of the Marine Corps for these Special Force elements. And this is sort of the pattern that they came up with. Now, this would serve with the Marine Corps for 4 years, 2012 to 2016, when it would be effectively replaced by the Glock 19 with both MUSOC and Force Recon, which would start to put these out of use. Now, currently today, they are still being used in some limited circumstances, but portions of them have been released from service, actually being sent back to Colt and then sold here on the commercial market. Those have gotten pretty expensive and collectible, and thousands of dollars if you want to purchase one. When they were released, I think in about 2019 or 2020, I think they were selling for about $2,000, but they've gone up quite a bit since then. Now, in 2016, Colt would actually pivot the production of the M45A1 to the U.S. commercial market, continuing production, and that's exactly what this is. So this does not have any ties to U.S. Marine Corps service, but it is really ostensibly this exact same firearm without the military markings or anything like that. It is a very well made, just very tight, nice manual, ambidextrous safety controls with the, I believe these are Trijicon night sights. Just an excellent feeling firearm, very, very tight, no movement at all, and I'm sure very accurate. So these are currently still in Colt's catalog, although I haven't seen any available for sale on the commercial market lately as brand new, but that's the case with a lot of firearms right now. As such, these were selling for about $2,000 or so on the commercial market, maybe a hair under $1,700, $1,800 back when they were readily available. Now I'm seeing on the used market that's about what they're selling for, is in the $2,000 plus range, depending on condition and everything like that. So very, very nice, probably one of the nicest modernized Colt 1911s out there on the market today. So very happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next is a very unique pistol that comes to us from a viewer in Oregon. So thank you so much for sending this one to us. This is a Walther P4. And this one comes with its original police leather holster. Now the P4, you're going to notice right away, looks an awful lot like a P38, and it is part of that same family. Now, the years leading into the Second World War, Germany is still issuing the P08 Luger as its standard issue sidearm. Now, everybody knows what a P08 Luger is. In fact, I'm going to talk about one here in a minute, just to give you guys an idea of something coming up. Anyway, the P08 was a little bit complicated and expensive to produce, and Germany is looking at, as they're very quickly modernizing their munitions in the 1930s, they're looking at a new service sidearm that's going to be cheaper and easier to produce, require less parts, easier to learn and train on, a little bit more reliable. So they start development, or Walther starts development on this, and it's officially adopted in 1938 by the German military service, or by the German military. Now, they would continue to issue the P08 Lugers. In fact, Mauser would produce those all the way up to 1942, and the P38s would stay in production until 1945, until the end of the war, and they would be produced by Mauser, Spreework, and Walther. Now, when the war would end, as we had talked about previously, there would be an order by the Allies for German production of military armament to cease. Therefore, Magnarn in France would take up a lot of Walther production, which they would on the P38 pattern. Now, in the 1950s through the 1960s, Walther would retake up production of these at Ulm in Germany, and they would start development of the new modified P1 pistol. Now, the P1 differed from the P38 mainly due to the use of an alloy frame, lightening up the weight of the pistol and the production time and cost. In the mid-1960s, the P1 would actually be adopted by the new German military, the Bundeswehr, as their standard issue sidearm. Just like the P38, of course, except for it did have the lighter alloy frame, it still used the 8-round detachable box magazine chambered in 9mm. Now in the 1970s, they're looking at further modernizing their military equipment. Walther had ended up coming up with the new P5 pistol, which would later be adopted, but as a stopgap they would develop the P4, which is this, and it's a further improved and further modified P1 pistol by shortening down the barrel just a little bit. They would replace the complicated top plate system, I guess you could call it, with a simple machine screw holding in the rear sight. They would go from a decocker safety to a decocker only on the left-hand side of the pistol. They would bob the hammer, but the rest of it was really the same. So there were still a lot of parts interchangeability, and the grip frame was the same, so it could still use the same P1 magazines. Now these would only be produced for about 3 years or so, 2 to 3 years, and only 7,500 units would be produced. Now when they were removed from German police service, the police markings would be milled off the side, and then they were brought into places like the United States and sold off as commercial surplus. So because very few of them were made, they're actually a pretty rare, unique, and collectible pistol, especially for people who like the P38 series of handguns. On the used market today, I'm seeing these anywhere from about $600 to $1,000, depending on condition of what they come with. Some commercial variants, which is the P38 Roman numeral 4, are the most rare, and those will, I think, see them top off at about $1,200 or so. So still kind of a lesser known P38 version. Very happy to get this in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next we have a very iconic and a very highly sought after pistol. This is going to be the HK P7 M8 specifically. And this will be a good continuation on to the P4 we just talked about. This is a 9mm, 8-round capacity because it is an M8. The original was a 7-round capacity, the P7. And it is also known as the squeeze cocker. Now because of that, you squeeze here, it will sort of bring this firing pin protrusion out the back. You're ready to fire. As long as you're holding that down, you can continue firing until empty. Now when you are empty, the slide will hold open. You can go ahead and just squeeze on it to drop the slide and continue back into firing. Now, through the 1970s, there was a growing need for a new police service pistol and a higher caliber. Now, a lot of what the German police had been using were in the .32 automatic, PP and PPK. In 1972, there was the Munich Olympics massacre, where it was very quickly determined that special German police forces like GSG-9 needed to be equipped with something that's going to have a little bit more stopping power. So they wanted to go up to a 9mm, but also stay in a smaller frame pistol. They would put out a trial for a solicitation for a new police sidearm. SIG, HK, and Walther would all enter submissions, and actually all three would be adopted by different police forces across Germany. The SIG P225 adopted as the P6. The HK PSP, known as the Police Self-Loading Pistol, this would be adopted as the P7, and then Walther's submission adopted as the P5, and that's what would replace the P4 that we just spoke about in about the late 1970s. So in 1979, this would actually be officially adopted and go into production. Now on the police model, it was a 7-round capacity, it was an all blued finish, and it had a heel-mounted magazine release with sort of plastic grip panels. Now, those are staying in production all the way until 2008. HK would come out with a series of commercial versions like this. This is the M8, so they went to an 8-round capacity and actually moved the magazine release up here to the left-hand side of the frame. They also had the M13, which was a double-stack 13-round capacity. Fun fact is that was actually entered into for submission for the XM9 handgun trials in the United States, which the Beretta M9 won in 1985. So a lot of this video is coming full circle. On collectors markets, this is actually highly, highly sought after. They are very well manufactured, very interesting firearms in the way that they function, and they are known for being incredibly accurate. The pricing on these has been steadily climbing, actually seeing these routinely between about $2,000 and $3,000 now. This one actually, this is not our price tag, but a former store must have had this and sold it for $4,500. I don't know how long ago. That's not our tag. Now this is actually has the NP3 finish on it, which was not actually a factory offering by HK, but it was a company, per my research, that was actually very well known for putting this sort of stainless type finish on the pistols. Doesn't seem to actually hurt the value at all, as these are still steadily selling pretty high. Non-factory original grips. These are made actually specifically for this pistol. They're actually very well made grips. These are on a lot of people's P7 handguns if you look online. So a little bit of a sort of customized P7 M8, but still a very valuable handgun, very interesting, and definitely very happy to get in and share it with you guys. Okay, last but not least is a very rare variation of the Luger that comes to us from a customer in New York. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Model P4 Navy Luger first issue, and we'll discuss a little bit about what that means. Now, if we're looking at the end of the late 1800s, there is the emergence of the new semi-automatic pistol type designs. Now, one of the most prominent that's getting the attention of Germany at the time is the Hugo Borchardt design of the C93 pistol. Now, it uses the toggle link action like the Luger would later use, but it has this large sort of spring apparatus towards the back of it. It almost looks like a snail shell, if you will. Very awkward balance, very difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to manufacture, and was not at all reliable, but it was a really good start in modern self-loading pistol technology. Now, Georg Luger, who also worked for DWM, who Hugo Borchardt worked for, had been noticing this new design and was thinking, hey, there's probably a good way that we can scale this down into a more concealable, more usable, and wieldy package. So he would come up with this design, his very own design, the Luger. Now, this would start getting the attention of militaries around the world. Everybody's looking at moving away from the antiquated revolver technology. This would include Germany, who was issuing the Reichsrevolver. Again, a very weird and complicated revolver with a safety. They wanted to move into this new era of self-loading pistols. Now, Switzerland had already been looking at the Luger, as was the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Switzerland would actually adopt it as its service sidearm. Now, the German Navy and the German Army were actually not beholden to one another in terms of their arms procurement, so, they could actually go after their own designs that they were interested in. So, in the early 1900s, around 1904, the Navy would order 100 units of this new Luger with a 6-inch barrel. It's actually a heavy profile barrel, for testing with the Navy. Now, the first 100 units are identifiable again by that heavier profile 6-inch barrel. It did have a lock bar type spring system here on the right hand side of the toggle, and it also used a leaf spring. They would test and trial those pistols, get feedback from people and officers that they were issued to, and then they would decide to, in 1904, go ahead and adopt the new model 1904 Luger. Now, their first full batch production run would come in 1906 with the so-called first issue, which is what this is. Now, in the first issue run, there were 19,000 units. They ran from serial number 1 to 9000A. In German serial number nomenclature, you run 10,000 units, and then you start over with 10,000, or I'm sorry, with 1, and then the letter prefix, the letter suffix. So it'd be 1A through 9999A, and then they would start over at 1B, so that they would do that in 10,000 unit blocks. So these would run serial number 1 to 9000A, 19,000 units. It was identical to the first 100 units issued, except they did delete a few features. They went to a standard thinner profile tapered barrel, which you see on here. They did get rid of that little lock type spring and went to the normal Luger mainspring system. Now, some interesting features of the early Navy Luger is you do have both a grip safety here and a manual kind of a lever safety here, which you're most familiar with on the Luger pistol. That locks the grip safety from being able to move this bar out of the way, allowing the trigger to fire. You have the Navy Crown M acceptance marks on the left-hand side of both the frame and the barrel. And also, even though this is a non-matching magazine, it does have the correct Navy M for the Kriegsmarine, or the Navy, stamped on the bottom of the floor plate with the wooden base. Also, you have a rear sight that is adjustable to 100 and 200 meters, and these would be made by DWM. You would have the commercial style serialization with the serial numbers found on the frame, the barrel, underneath the side plate, and a couple internal parts, so very limited in terms of the amount of serial numbers found on the firearm. Original kind of a rust blue with the Strad small parts, the trigger, the magazine release, the takedown lever, the safety. Now, they would then move into a second production run, and they would make one big change. By this time, the Army is looking at adopting the P08 Luger, and they had changed on the safety. So, when the safety lever is up, it is blocking that grip safety, and you see the word gesichert, which means safe, and it's down here in the bottom position. Now, when the Army would adopt it, the down position would actually be the safe position, and that itself would raise a little bar that would block the trigger bar from firing, if you will. And up in the upper position, it would be marked gesichert. Once they moved into the second pattern, the Navy would actually switch that to be in accordance with the Army model in 1908, the P08. And then they would recall all the first edition Navy Lugers to go back and have it retrofitted with the safety being swapped, or the safety position being swapped. This is the so-called first pattern or first issue altered, which would have the safety altered. Now this would be a first issue unaltered, where the safety was not altered. So a little bit of a differentiation there. This is a very nice example. This is all matching other than the side plate here. So the side plate is mismatched. And it looks like somebody at some point either swapped out the front sight blade for more of like a target configuration, or they shaved it down and painted or did something, kind of just wore off the finish here. It's actually a really nice target sight and better than the original sight, but it is not original or authentic to this pistol. Other than that, it's all matching throughout, including the grip panels or the magazine. The magazine's not matching either, with nice original finish on it. So a very, very nice, very rare and collectible firearm. The pricing on these things is all over the place because of the front sight and the non-matching side plate. Of course, it's going to hurt the value. But these first issue unaltered Navy Lugers go anywhere from $4,000 to, you know, sky's the limit depending on the buyer, but typically the base would be about $4,000 on something like this. But a very, very interesting pistol nonetheless, and very happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. I'm going to leave you off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.